Good morning. My name is Gabe, and pastor is preoccupied. And I thought I'd jump in to maybe occupy the time and share something with you. This is connected to our land acknowledgement. And in the land acknowledgement, there's a phrase that says that Liliuokalani, to avoid the bloodshed of her people, she surrendered. So I'm a docent at Iolani Palace. So I'm going to share a little story about that story about Liliuokalani having to surrender and under protest to the United States to avoid the bloodshed of her people. And my tour kind of sounds like this. When Liliuokalani became queen, she was required by the provisional government to honor the 1887 Constitution, whereas she is just a ceremonial figure and transferring absolute power to the legislature. And when she initially took to the throne, she did this under protest. After several months, she decided to travel the islands, speaking with her subjects. And after 11 months later, she and all thousands and thousands of Hawaiians wanted to replace that 1887 Constitution. So when she attempted to promulgate a new constitution, that's when she was deposed. And that's when the monarchy came to an end. Led by a group of wealthy, influential businessmen who had other ideas of Hawaii. They wanted Hawaii to be part of the United States through ways of annexation. And so they led a rebellion against the Queen. With the help of U.S. Minister John Stevens, U.S. troops were ordered from the United States to the islands. On that day, January 17 of 1893, the soldiers came ashore. Initially, the Americans asked the Navy or the soldiers to come to the islands, that there may be a civil outbreak and that they should come to help protect American interests. Well, the soldiers arrived, docked in the harbor on that day, came ashore and took position in support of the rebels. What they did, they went across to Iolani Hale, across the street from Iolani Palace, set up fort, pointed cannons, loaded rifles, and artillery to the palace and to the Queen. So to avoid bloodshed, she surrendered under protest, but not to the provisional government. She surrendered to the United States government, hoping that when word reached Washington, D.C., she would be supported, simple, and restored back to the throne. President Cleveland had growing doubts of what is going on in the islands, sent Commissioner James Blount to look into Hawaii's conflict. When James Blount arrived, the first thing he did was restore the flag atop the government building, sent the troops back to the ship, did a thorough investigation in favor of the Queen. President Cleveland, I can't do the P's, yeah? So I'll say Resident Cleveland. Resident Cleveland told the provisional government, it should have been a P in front of that, restore the Queen to power. Your actions are illegal. It is an act of war. What did they do? They flatly refused to comply with the president. Went on to proclaim Hawaii an independent republic through a legislative process who they knew a lot of the legislators. That form of government, there are no more kings and queens. They don't exist. Liliuokalani was literally cast aside. When those loyal to the Queen staged a counter-revolution, it quickly failed. They were all arrested along with the Queen. Although she denied any implications, the government of the Republic was determined to prosecute her. Their goal was to humiliate her and have her finally renounce her claim to the throne. she was arrested. And in her throne room, where her trial was, she was given the maximum sentence of 5 years hard labor and a $5,000 fine. President Cleveland, still in support of the Queen, but because of the political gridlock during that era, he turned the entire affair over to Congress, who refused to look into the matter further, adopted a position of neutrality. We can remain neutral. The Queen and her followers were left adrift, while later they decided to reduce her sentence to house arrest. They went over to her home at Washington Place, cuffed her wrists, escorted her to the palace, up the beautiful Koa staircase, down the beautiful hallway, into a room in the palace. It's the left room fronting King Street. That's where she was imprisoned for 8 months. Imprisoned in a place she so proudly reigned. Is that way to treat a queen? Well, they did so. They offered her the bare necessities, a single bed, a single desk where she sat and wrote lots of songs, a simple chair, a common couch, a wooden cabinet for her edibles, and her private safe. And while in that room, she spent long hours in prayer. She was a strong Christian woman. She prayed to her Christian God, and none of her prayers were answered. While in that room, how does she occupy herself? She was not allowed newspapers or general literature to read, but found great comfort in bits of news wrapped around bouquets of flowers brought to her on a daily basis. So she's behind closed door, reading the newspapers about her trials and tribulations and the lies they bestow upon me. The soldiers finally caught wind of that activity, removed any reading material, and no more flowers to be delivered to the Queen. While in that room, she spent long hours in prayer writing music. She was a talented musician, a wonderful singer, and she started writing music. She wrote 160 songs within an 8-month period in that room. That was her downtime. That was her therapy. One song in particular, often played today, entitled The Queen's Prayer. In that song, on her first stanza, she's expressing sorrow, bitter angerness for her predicament. But by the third verse, she's offering forgiveness for her enemies. A strong Christian woman indeed, offering forgiveness for her enemies. While in that room, she began sewing this crazy patch quilt. If you ever get to Iolani Palace and visit there and get into the imprisonment chamber, there's a beautiful display under a glass casing. It's a quilt she started sewing with her ladies in waiting. And in that quilt, the center of the quilt, she started embroidering a record of her life. She feared she would die in that room. The quilt would be a testament of what she endured. One of the quilt, you could just see she's expressing happy times when she became queen and ascended the throne. Another quilt, very gloomy, where she's expressing sadness and pain and sorrow. There's a third part of the quilt, a square, that expresses when she abdicated the throne. But why would you abdicate the throne, Queen? I abdicated the throne to secure leniency for my jailed supporters. Not much of an option did she have. And the fourth quilt in the center, very heart-wrenching, because under her name, Her Majesty Queen Liliuokalani, she embroidered, I am imprisoned at Iolani Palace on January 17th, 1893. Well, in the end, the Queen and her jail supporters were given complete pardon, but the leaders of the Republic consolidated their power, moving one step closer to annexations, which happened 5 years later in 1898. Upon her release, her last effort, she traveled to the United States, lobbying against annexation. Her efforts to no avail. No one would listen to her. A new administration under the direction of McKinley favored annexation. She came home from that trip a broken woman. She lost her country. And on that day, annexation, she and her subjects hid behind dark black curtains, behind doors in mourning. They could not celebrate the day of annexation. For the next 2 decades, she lived a quiet life at her home at Washington Place. After suffering a stroke, she died at the age of 79. On her death, get rid of the P's, on her death, she created the Liliuokalani Trust Fund. All her holdings went to support orphans and destitute children, giving preference to the Hawaiian children. Today, that organization is still intact, the Liliuokalani Trust Fund. It has helped tens and thousands of orphans and destitute children in our beautiful island of Hawaii. So if you ever get a chance, you want to hear the whole story, come to Iolani Palace. Sign up for a docent tour on Wednesdays and Thursdays. I hope this helped occupy, sitting here, enjoying yourself among each other. It's a beautiful Sunday. No matter what's going on behind the door, continue to enjoy our company as we continue our service. I don't know what else we have planned. Beth, please.